This video discusses books that contain the following content warnings. More details will be in the description. Happy International Women's Day! Hi guys, welcome to my channel. It is International Women's Day. It's one of my favourite days of the year, my favourite times to talk about things that I am passionate about. If you don't know me, if you are here by chance and you haven't seen any of my videos before, I am a big feminist. Feminism means a lot to me, and starting last year I took International Women's Day as an opportunity to talk about some feminist books that I absolutely love. Last year I talked about 5 books that I would recommend, 5 books that I wanted to read, and I also recommended some amazing female content creators I think you should be subscribed to. But this year I'm doing things differently. I was thinking about the books that I wanted to talk about, and I realised that the books that I read are quite limited. Feminism looks different to everybody, no matter who you are. If you are a feminist, it's going to look different to one person than it is to the next, and I think that just giving you recommendations from one person isn't necessarily giving you the opportunity to find the right feminist texts for you. So I reached out to a bunch of incredible female content creators here on BookTube and asked them to film a clip talking about a book that they would recommend, and this way you get recommendations of creators that I think you should watch at the same time as getting recommendations straight from them of books that you should read. And hopefully that means that you will get a recommendation that will suit you for sure, rather than just things that suit me personally. There are going to be things like non-fiction and poetry, as well as your standard fiction, whether it's light-hearted fantasy, hard-hitting in here. And I'm really excited to share this video with you. I really hope that you enjoy. Before we get started, in the description I have the links of every booktuber included, when their sections start, so you can skip ahead if you want to look at specific recommendations, as well as all of the trigger or content warnings that might be included in the book that they talk about. So there are a lot of books that I personally wanted to talk about, but I don't want to keep you here forever, so I've narrowed it down to just the one. I do have some honourable mentions from myself in the description if you want to check that out, but the book that I want to talk about is Bad Habits by Flynn Meaney. Now this is a really fun novel. It's about a girl named Alex who goes to a private boarding school that is also a Catholic school, and she doesn't like it there. She really does not want to be a part of this school, so she takes it upon herself to do everything she can to get kicked out, and she decides that the best way to do that is to put on a production of the Vagina Monologues. What ensues is an attempt to do something really controversial, but at the same time she learns things about herself, about the school that she's part of, about the girls that go to her school as well as the boys that go to her school, and how feminism is a part of this school life in ways that she hadn't expected before. It's really funny. Like, it's one of the funniest books I've ever read. I have laughed out loud so many times reading this book, and I don't do that very often, so I would 100% recommend this book if you were looking for something funny. It's light-hearted, it's great. I really love the best friend character, the love interest is funny. There's just so many incredible moments in this book. I just really enjoyed it, and if you haven't checked it out yet, I would definitely recommend that you do so. That was my really bad attempt at explaining a book to you. I'm now going to pass you over to a whole bunch of people who are going to do much better jobs at explaining their books to you than I did. I really hope you enjoy, and I'll see you at the end of the video.
Hello, it's Emma from Drinking by My Shelf, and I have a book to recommend here, which is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This was a Booker Prize winner, so I'm sure you've heard of it, and I don't know, if you're anything like me, I often find the Booker Prize winners a bit intimidating. I worry they're going to be like too literary and go over my head, but I really recommend this one. It is huge, but I still read it all in one day, and I found it so accessible, so easy to read, so engaging. So I really do recommend if it's one that you've been at all frightened of reading. Basically, this book is divided into, I think it's 12 sections, each from a different perspective. It's mostly women's perspective, mostly black women's perspective, but not 100%. You'll meet a few other characters in there as well. And they're mostly set in the present day, but some of them do span back as well. We go all the way back to around 1905 and then all the way forward to present day. So it's kind of a tapestry of black women's experience in Britain. It's a modern history of Britain through all of these different lives, and they're all connected They have their own stories, but you can start to draw this like very complicated, you can look it up if you don't want to figure it out yourself. Someone else has done the work of drawing this family tree kind of spider web of how all the different characters are connected to each other, and it's really fun spotting those links. I think this is a great one to read to get a really wide, diverse range of women's experiences and to expand your thoughts about feminism to include so many different types of feminism and so many different experiences, or at least that's how I felt when I was reading it. So that's why I'd really recommend this one as a great feminist read.
Hey there, I'm Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe, and a feminist book that I really enjoyed reading last year was Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde, and this is a non-fiction book that's a collection of Audre Lorde's essays on why silence is not helpful in activism. Audre Lorde was a black feminist, lesbian writer, and she was just such a voice for women, for black women, for LGBT plus rights, and I just think it's a brilliant book on feminism because it's so intersectional. She talks about all the ways in which it's important for feminism in particular to be intersectional, but also why race activism or LGBT plus rights are just all incorporated and how we're all fighting for the same causes, and that's why it's important to support all of these causes and not just the ones that benefit you. And she just has so many important and generally brilliant things to say. She writes them and puts them in such clear and concise words that are so easy to understand. That's why I think this collection of essays is just absolutely perfect for a feminist reader, and I really recommend everyone read it. There you have it, and I hope you pick this one up.
Hello beautiful bookish people, my name is Hannah and I'm super excited today to talk to you about one of my favorite feminist books, Shrill, Notes from a Loud Woman. So this is basically Lindy West's memoir as she talks about what it's like to be a feminist in the 21st century. It talks about body positivity and representation in the media. I think it's super easy to read and understand, and coming from the perspective of Lindsay, she has a really distinct voice as she talks about these serious topics with almost a comedic voice. It got me thinking of how we use language in the media and how some of it can be condescending. It gives you arguments of why you should be for modern feminism, and even gives you certain arguments to combat some misogynistic people in your life if you want to. Overall, I think Shrill is a super easy, digestible work of feminist non-fiction that I think it's the perfect place to start if you were looking to get into the genre. But yeah, I hope you pick it up and just understand women that much more. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, it's Ella from Ella's Novellas, and for Theresa video for International Women's Day, I wanted to talk about a book in a genre that I read a lot of. I read a lot of fantasy and a lot of fantasy romance, so I thought it was only fitting to pick a fantasy romance book for this video. And so I've gone with Intrigue Me by Grace Raven, and this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I think from first glance, most people wouldn't think of a Beauty and the Beast retelling as a feminist tale, especially because there isn't much agency that Belle has in the original Beauty and the Beast story. But in Intrigue Me, we're following a young woman called Luvine, who is a widow, and along with dealing with the grief and sorrow that comes with being a widow, she's also taking care of her younger sister and father. Luvine is a character who is very outspoken, very willing to speak her mind. Alongside Luvine, we're being told the story of her sister, who is a lot more soft-spoken, but throughout the course of the story, they're never compared against each other. They're never, one is never seen as stronger or braver or smarter than the other. It's just showcasing two different ways to be a woman and highlighting that there is no wrong way to be a woman. There's no wrong way to express yourself as a woman. There's no wrong way to present yourself as a woman. And that is something I feel like this story does really well. And it's more about the two sisters finding happiness both in their romantic relationships, but also in their relationship with each other and in themselves. It's also a story that is very sex positive. The main character is a widow and has had some sexual experience throughout her life, and she brings that into the relationship, and that is seen as very much a positive. The main character is never shamed for having that more sex positive attitude and having that more sexual experience in the relationship, and that's something I want to see more of in the stories that I read. I read a lot of stories that are told in more like medieval Europe, and that's not always the case It's one of the reasons I love this story, and I love how sex positive it is and how there's no shame brought to her for her personality or her sexual experience. There's also no shame brought to her sister for her experiences or her personality. And it is very much about these two characters' romantic relationships, but it is also about them and their strength. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and if you're someone that's interested in fantasy romance and wanted a story that is more sex positive and a story that doesn't shame women for being more girly or less girly or more outspoken or less outspoken, and you just want a story that celebrates women for who they are and also showcases these two women on their path to finding romantic relationships, then I would definitely recommend Intrigue Me by Grace Draven, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, it's Tish, and I wanted to talk a little bit and recommend Aphrodite Made Me Do It by Tristan Mateer. This was one of my 2020 reads and I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favorites of the year and just one of my favorite poetry collections that I've read in a really long time, and I absolutely loved it. This book is written in a way where you get to hear from the author herself as well as Aphrodite, and as someone who is extremely obsessed with Greek mythology, and Aphrodite being one of my favorite goddesses, I felt like her voice was extremely authentic, and if I ever met her in person, this is exactly how I feel like she would sound like. So I thought the author did an amazing job at really bringing her to life and giving her a voice and getting to know her on such an intimate level that I feel like a lot of Greek myths and other retellings like just don't give her justice, and so this was really enjoyable, especially those parts to hear from her, but the author just did an amazing job, period, with all of the stuff that she wrote and all of the heavy topics that she covers in here. So I do want to say that there is trigger warnings for several themes in this book, but the feminist themes are some of my favorite parts of this book. They're so well written and so thought out and really encompass and include everyone under that umbrella, and I really enjoyed it. So many people I feel like can relate to the things in this book, and the art in here is super cute and beautiful, and I love it, and it fits so well with the writing style, and so I will be picking up some more of Tristan Mateer's work, but I honestly cannot recommend this book enough. If you enjoy poetry, and even if you don't, I think it would be a fun read and just kind of gets you thinking about a lot of different things, and it was super enjoyable and I would highly recommend.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I make videos at Wonderfully Bookish on YouTube, and I also have a blog called Wonderfully Bookish. My book that I want to recommend is What Would Boudica Do? By E. Foley and B. Coates. It's so great, it's non-fiction. If this cover alone doesn't sell you, then I don't know what will. But it's basically stories of loads of women throughout history. It's really diverse. You've got people from all sorts of cultures and all sorts of like countries and races, and yeah, they've worked so hard to make this as diverse as they can. And it just tells kind of brief histories of each of these incredible women, just really awesome women. I really love sort of powerful women throughout history. I also have a podcast, like a general knowledge podcast, and it's one of our favourite topics to cover. So this was like a great source of inspiration for me. But one thing that's great about it is that as well as kind of telling you why these women were so incredible, it puts a modern sort of contemporary spin on what they can teach you today. So anything from body image to not having to act like a lady, sense of style, not wanting to get married, not wanting to have children, also the other way around, like happily wanting to be sort of a housewife and wanting children. So many different stories of incredible women in here that can teach you so much about how to be an awesome woman yourself. Definitely recommend it. I love it so much. One of my favourite people in here that I talked about on my podcast is a woman called Wang Zhenyi, and I'm a massive space nerd, and the book basically describes her as being the Brian Cox of 18th century China, which spoke straight to my heart. So yeah, if you want to learn about some awesome women throughout history and what they can teach you in today's world, then definitely read What Would Boudica Do?
Hello, I'm Hannah from Letter M. The book I want to recommend is Fat Lip. This is a love story collection, a memoir in parts, an anthology of relatable awkwardness. Fat Lip will make you laugh, cry and reach for your loved ones, and I wrote it. So this is completely a self-promo moment, but I put my heart and soul into this. I really enjoyed writing it, but it is a collection of short stories that are all about the love that we share that isn't romantic love. I'm not talking boyfriends and girlfriends, I'm talking, you know, the relationships between our friends, with our family. It is very feminist and opinionated, because I am very feminist and opinionated, and I hope you really like it.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabine from Sabine's Book Nook. First of all, happy International Women's Day, and second of all, I am of course gonna give you a book recommendation, and one of my favorite books that I've ever, I wouldn't say written, unfortunately I haven't written this story, but the best book that I've ever read is Meat Market by Juno Dawson. It's been a while since I've read it, but I remember it being so good and so well written that I am really excited to give it a reread soon. So in this book we follow our main character called Jana Novak, and she is kind of like an androgynous looking girl, and one day she's walking with her friends in this theme park and she gets scouted by a model agent, or like a model scouter, I guess is how you would call that person. From that moment on, she kind of rises into fame, and it is about her getting into the model world. You also see kind of how the modeling industry works and how it puts a really big emphasis on staying thin, and I feel like Jana wanted to kind of break that stereotype. It is also a little bit more about body positivity, and I loved the way that Juno Dawson wrote this book. It felt like a super realistic YA contemporary, and I love that about it so much. The characters were flawed, but that made them feel so much more real, and I just feel like this is one of the most underrated books here in the book community, and I wish more people would have read it. So definitely read Meat Market by Juno Dawson. It is amazing.
Hello, hi, my name's Rowan and my channel is Wandering Through Wills. I'm here on Carey's channel to talk about a feminist book of my choice. Do you have a moment to talk about Our Lord and Saviour, The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow? This is a historical fiction book that has a touch of fantasy in the form of witching. We follow three sisters that embody the typical archetypes of a witch: the mother, the maiden, and the crone. Where we start our story, the sisters are separated, but they soon come together to thwart an evil plot brewing in New Salem. Each sister has their own journey and growth, and they get involved in trying to return witching to the world in the midst of the suffragettes movement. There is an interracial lesbian couple. It touches on the NAACP type movement that's in New Salem at that time, as well as highlighting that for black women and especially black witches, the fight is even harder. At one point, one of the black characters says, "They always come for me and mine first." This book tackles the idea of sisterhood, feminism, and humanity in combination with lyrical writing and a fictional backdrop. This book just made me feel incredibly empowered by the end of it, and throughout the whole thing I was emotional and I was proud to be a woman by the end of this book. The journeys that all of the characters go through, not even just the three sisters, they are incredible, and the absolute character development that all three sisters go through to end this sort of patriarchal type evil is just insane, and I really enjoyed it. I knew even 20% into this book that I would give it 5 stars, so I would highly recommend you read it, especially if you like things like nursery rhymes, because Alex E. Harrow has taken nursery rhymes and in the lore of her book spun that into be that those are witchings, and if you say the words and you have the will and the way, then you can do anything and you can make anything into a spell, and anyone can be a witch no matter who you are. It's not through blood, you can do anything. And coming out of this book, I just felt incredible and I felt like I could do anything. So, The Once and Future Witches.
Hi everyone, it's Julia from the channel Shakespeare and Such, and I want to share with you a feminist book recommendation that is near and dear to my heart and very on brand for me because it's a classic. This is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, the most underappreciated Bronte sister. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall not only is just inherently feminist in many ways and things that happen in the plot, but also is often referred to as one of the earliest feminist novels published. So that's amazing, right? It's so cool. So The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, if you aren't familiar at all, nice poem, is about a woman named Helen who shows up in a new town with her young son. She's dressed in all black, no one knows her story, and so there's a lot of speculation and gossip in the town, and eventually she gives her diary to someone whom she trusts, and we get to find out her whole story about how she came to this town and what's her deal, and just the decisions that she made in her life. I love and respect her so much. What a journey. Also, I love this book because I literally remember being like 30-40 pages in, it's so early, and someone starts judging her about how she is raising her son, and she just lets him have it. She's like, well, I don't think you would be saying that if my son was my daughter, so I can't really see how your point is valid. And I'm like, Helen, I love you. So I hope you will all give this book a shot. I think you would love it. Less so if you're a fan of the more gothic Bronte novels, but more so if you're potentially a Jane Austen fan. So there's some food for thought for you.
Hi, it's Emma Novella. Karis has asked me to recommend a book for International Women's Day, and she was really mean to me and wouldn't let me pick an entire author's collection. So like, I've totally respected that and not tried to promote them in any way, and I'm just gonna tell you about the book that I think has a good female character, which is The Infinity Courts by Akemi Dawn Bowman. This isn't out until April, the 6th of April, but it's everything. I love it. Nami is an incredible character. She goes through such a growth in this book, and as with all of Akemi's characters, they're just all really inspiring young women that go out there and kind of fight for what they believe in and just try and get through the situations they're in. And I just need you all to read them, and all her other books that I totally didn't place in here so that I could promote them, despite Karis telling me not to.
Hi, I'm Carey from Carey Berry, and today Karis really nicely asked me to talk about my favourite feminist book with you guys. And originally I actually struggled when I saw this because like my mind immediately jumped to non-fiction, and I've got a lot of feminist non-fiction books to read, but I haven't actually read any of them yet, so I kind of struggled. But then I started thinking about one of my favourite books, which is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, because I am a huge Greek mythology lover. Like, I just love it so much. But 1,000 Ships is a retelling of the Trojan War and the aftermath of that from the perspective of women. So there were a lot of women in the myth, but they're often kind of ignored in the retellings and the history. So Natalie Haynes explored it from their perspective, and it's just absolutely beautifully written. Like, I just cannot get over it. It's my favourite retelling. I just love it so much. Like, I cannot stop raving about this book ever. So yeah, I just really love it, and I would really recommend it because there are some incredibly strong female characters in this, and it really centres women at that myth. Because I think there's one quote in it that's like, a war doesn't ignore half the people it touches, so why do we? Which is so true, because when it comes to war and mythical wars, we often ignore the women perspective, and obviously they were heavily involved. So yeah, highly recommend this.
Hi, I'm Theresa from the channel Sappho's Library, and today I'm here to talk about Music from Another World by Robin Talley. If you're familiar with my content, you'll be unsurprised to hear that this is a sapphic book. This takes place in the 1970s and it follows an epistolary format, so letters and diary entries between two girls living in rather conservative backgrounds in California. So first up, you've got Tammy, who is a lesbian, and she's in the closet because her family are uber religious, very conservative, extremely homophobic. And of course, it is just not safe for her to be out. And she's matched as a pen pal with Sharon, who lives in San Francisco, and she comes from a Catholic family, and again, gay people aren't really accepted by them. There's a lot of homophobia. You follow the girls getting closer through these letters and also some of their lives. Tammy struggling with her family, Sharon finding out that her brother is gay and kind of unlearning some of the homophobia she's been brought up with and surrounded by. and then getting involved in a women's bookstore. It is extremely heavy in terms of content. I do recommend being aware of the content warnings before you read it. It is not always easy. So as I've mentioned, your characters join this women's book club and also these feminist, queer rights, punk rock scenes, and they're just so interlinked, and you really see women kind of driving these movements and getting involved, and I think it's just so important and so fun to read about as well, to read about these scenes. And I really loved the way this was written. I found that the letters and the diary entries conveyed such emotion, such authenticity, that it felt very, very real, like I was reading real letters from real girls, and I loved it a lot. So yes, there's a pretty huge feminist theme to this book, although it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm probably not doing it justice. But this women's bookstore was just such a key part of the plot, and you met a lot of characters here and lots of different women with different experiences and stories, and I loved it so much. So yes, I highly, highly recommend this book. It is powerful and moving, but also uplifting and hopeful, and it's perfect if you're looking to explore some feminist themes in a more historical setting, as well as the intersection and overlap with queer rights movements and the punk rock scene. Just incredible.
Hi, I'm Beth from Books Nest, and I'm going to be sharing with you a feminist recommendation read. Feminism can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, so when Carey asked me to pick out a book that I thought represented the feeling of feminism and something that stood for empowerment, I had a look at my shelves. I saw lots of different books that I would be interested in picking with some really empowering lead characters. But in the end, I picked up The Vagina Monologues by Eve Ensler. This is a non-fiction book I read really recently, and it blew me away with how empowering this book felt. It started off by telling you it was going to empower you and empower the word vagina, and by the end of the book, it certainly did that. This book is not one to be taken lightly. There are trigger warnings for sexual assault and rape within this, because this is built up of over 200 women's experiences, and there's so many different types of narratives being told here, so many different stories, so many different cultures as well coming through the pages of this book. Eve Ensler really did her research for this. This is also a play, if you've heard of it before. That might be why it sounds familiar. It's a play that I definitely would like to go and see one day, but basically each story is told through a different medium almost as well, depending on how Eve Ensler thought the interview should be portrayed in the written words. So some are told in prose, some are very short and fleeting, some are really just poems, and others are told over a couple of pages of just normal paragraph text, which makes this all the more engaging. But it tells different women's stories over different times, throughout different cultures, and ultimately brings power to the word vagina and brings power to the women telling these stories. So if you're after a feminist non-fiction, I would absolutely recommend this. It's really fantastic. I feel like everyone should read this and just completely open your eyes to what it's telling you and the power that you have within your own body.
Hello, my name is Lily and my channel is Lily Eleanor Reads. Happy International Women's Day, and thank you so much to Carey for inviting me to be part of this video. The book that I want to recommend to you all is Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. This is her biomythography, so essentially this is a memoir, but in calling it a biomythography she is acknowledging that although this book may not be the most factual recount of the events of her early life, this is very much her truth and this is the way that she wants to tell her story. So we follow Audre throughout the 1930s, 40s and 50s in New York City as she grows up as a black lesbian, and we follow her experiences as a child being legally blind and her relationship with her family and her experiences as a young woman in the city. We follow her growing up, realizing that she is gay, and her relationships with various lovers. We follow her to Mexico where she lived for a few years and the relationships that she had out there. We follow her living in the gay village in New York City. This is truly one of my favourite memoirs, as you might be able to tell from all of the tabs in this book. I just think that her reflections are so insightful and so interesting. I think the writing is absolutely beautiful. You may know that Audre Lorde is a poet, and that absolutely shines through with this book. I just think she talks about so many kind of wider topics, but she also talks about them in such a personal way. I just feel like any person could find something to connect to with this book. So if you haven't read anything by Audre Lorde, I would highly recommend it that you pick this up. I think it's fantastic. It's one of my favourite memoirs of all time and truly one of my favourite books of all time.
Hello everybody on Carey's channel. My name is Tazmyn May from the channel Tea Books and Tazmyn, and if any of you know me, you will not be surprised by this pick because it's Jane Eyre. Classics aren't for everyone, I know that, but this bitch is. If you're scared about reading something from 200 years ago, I highly recommend the audiobook on Audible narrated by Tandy Newton. I've raved about it so much The book, which I read for the first time in 2020, is better than any adaptation I've ever seen of it. I've seen the 2012 film with Mia Wasikowska, and I've seen the National Theatre production of it, like, I think I saw it 4 times. I loved it so much. I need to watch the old BBC miniseries, but I'm still certain that nothing will beat the original book. I always hype on about the fact that classics are classics and remain timeless because the themes that they deal with are still so prevalent after centuries. While the restrictions on women in modern day Western society are obviously so much better than way back when, there are so many parallels, and you can still see so many similarities in Jane's feelings of what she's experiencing and what we experience today, which is incredibly depressing. But overall, it is a book about hope and empowerment, and Jane finds herself, you know. By the end of the novel, she's, I think, 18, so a baby. But back in those days, by the age of 18, you have to be, you know, on the ball. Otherwise, you won't have work or food and you'll die. There are so many incredible relationships in this. Everything is so fleshed out. The writing is stunning. The characters, relationships with all of the like interweaving characters is just, oh, I love it so much. I need to reread it immediately. If you want to talk about Jane Eyre, DM me.
Hi, my name's Rachel. My channel name is Reads with Rachel, and thank you so much to Carey for inviting me to be a part of this project. So I actually had a hard time narrowing down which book to pick, but I decided on one that I just read last month, and it is White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad. And I highly recommend it to basically everybody, but particularly white women who call themselves feminists. This book is about how both historically and in the present, white women have weaponized their proximity to white maleness, which is typically seen as the default. And they weaponize this against women of color, black women, indigenous women, and other women of color. Not only is it from the POV of a woman who is not US centered, she's not a United States citizen, but she's also of Middle Eastern descent. One of the issues with feminism currently today is that white feminism, particularly American feminism, American white feminism, is seen as the default, and we have the loudest voice, and we don't use it for the good of women of color. In fact, white women weaponize their whiteness and hurt people of color. Despite all of these movements, these I'm with her and boss bitch feminism that's going around, we are not united. And in a large capacity, white women are doing harm. She says in chapter 6, for all the I'm with her and the future is female high-fiving floating around, it's becoming increasingly clear that having more white women in managerial positions won't result in a more just and equitable world. This continues to be glossed over by the rhetoric of empowerment. Liberation is more than equality for some in an unjust system. This book really breaks down the difference between white feminism, which is centered on equality, which in the end only means that white women will be equal to white men, rather than feminism by women of color, which is typically centered around the ideal of justice rather than equality. Thanks again, Carey. See you next time. Bye!
Hey everyone, I would like to recommend A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and this is actually non-fiction because it's basically 2 of her essays combined into this one short book. This is a bind-up, as you can see, but A Room of One's Own is a brilliant feminist essay about what it's like being a female artist, not having the independence, the money, or the room of one's own to actually create what they want to create. She talked about many different topics. As you can see, I tapped quite a bit because there were just so many interesting quotes and ideas in this little book. Also, for example, about how women were silenced in history, how poverty is keeping them from, you know, living their full potential when it comes to art and writing and literature, how men kept writing books with female characters, and how there is a lack of female friendship seen in books. She talked about so many different topics in around 100 pages, so I highly recommend you pick it up for yourself, and I'm pretty sure that after you finish it you will think like, whoa, there's so much to think about. I thought this one was absolutely brilliant and I highly recommend it.
Feminism! When Carey asked me to be a part of this, I knew exactly what book I wanted to talk about, because I thought perhaps people will talk about books with feminism, but maybe American books or British books, and there was a book in mind that I wanted to talk about, which is Kim Ji-young, born 1982, because this is a book that is set in Korea, and I thought it was extremely interesting to see a book that has feminism entwined in it from a different perspective, so from a Korean perspective. And this book follows Kim Ji-young. We get to see her grow up as a child, as a teenager, and into womanhood, and it deals a lot with how females are pretty much ignored whenever they have an issue. It follows Kim Ji-young, and she is just trying to live, but she's constantly pushed back by her male counterparts. And so we see her in high school, and we see how society has moulded institutions to fit men. And so if a female is ever having any issues with sexism, it's pretty much ignored. And then we also get to see Kim Ji-young as an adult, and she gives birth and she creates a family, and then she starts to lose her sense of mental stability, and it doesn't even fully explain what was actually wrong with her, because the whole point was that she went to the doctors to try and get herself looked at, and so she knew that she was actually okay, and she was dealt with very incorrectly, and the doctor was male, and there's a lot to do with medical gaslighting as well as just normal gaslighting. And I really did enjoy reading a different perspective in terms of feminism. If you're wanting to read a book that's set in a different country so you can see how feminism and feminist issues are different in different countries, then I definitely recommend this book.
Okay, so there we have it. We have had a whole bunch of amazing recommendations. I really hope you found at least one book in that list that you want to check out. Don't forget to go and subscribe to every single one of these content creators. I absolutely adore them all. So a big thank you to all of you for contributing to this video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments one feminist novel that you would recommend, whether it's a book that has feminism as a specific theme, or if it's a book with a particularly strong female character or message. I would love to hear your recommendations. I'm always looking for new feminist recommendations. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon for another video.